Hi! Today on our tutorial we are going to do fondant rosettes. So this is a technique that I did a long time ago. I've been doing it a lot. It's a very popular option for wedding cakes. It adds a really nice romantic feel and it's really good if there's like a lot of flowers involved or roses or something like that. So it's a really pretty design and I love making it and I'm excited to show you. So what we'll need for today's tutorial is obviously your cake. So this cake has been covered in fondant. See the last tutorial I did about covering your cake in fondant if you haven't already, and that can show you how to get these nice crisp edges, which is important for this design as well. For color, I'm doing the white rosette, so I stuck with a white base. If you're doing a colored cake like a blush or purple or black even, make sure that your base is the same color as your rosettes. You will need a pizza cutter and water and a paintbrush, a little rolling pin. So this you'll use to roll out your fondant for the rosettes. Oops. You'll need your shortening, toothpicks, and cornstarch. And then what's really important for this design is our KitchenAid mixer with our pasta roller attachment. So this is quite pricey, so you don't need it. You can roll everything out by hand. I used to do that all the time. But we use this for flowers, this design, a bunch of other designs, so it comes in really handy. So if you love making cakes and you do it all the time, definitely worth the investment. I think you can buy this separate from the spaghetti and fettuccine cutter on Amazon. I finally found it alone, so you don't have to buy both if you don't need it. But yeah, it's really great to have. You can use one of the tabletop ones too, I've seen on Amazon. Just as long as it'll thin out your fondant to the right width. Especially with this design, you want the fondant to be exactly the same width so it looks cohesive throughout and just looks really beautiful on the design. Oh, what's your bow? Taking your bow. Oh, and fondant you'll need as well. So again, satin ice, it's my favorite. It works so great with this design. And then also saran wrap. Saran wrap is important. So I think that's everything we need to get started. So let's do it. Say bye. All right, so here we go. Fondant rosettes. So first off, we get our fondant. So for this, I just take a little chunk at a time. So this is already previously kneaded. I use it for the cake to cover this. So I'll just take a chunk, maybe about this big to start off with, like a handful. And then make sure to close up your bin, don't let it dry out, because even if you leave it open for however long it takes to do this, you'll get a crust on your fondant and then it turns lumpy and just ruins it. So close it up, make sure that it is good, and then I'm getting my shortening here and conditioning it. And then the next step is to roll it out. So cornstarch everywhere. Then you flatten it out, and with your rolling pin, you start rolling it. So the trick for this is when you're using a pasta attachment, you want the width of the fondant to not be wider than the attachment or it's not going to go through properly. So keep that in mind when you're rolling it out. So it's kind of like that. Then you turn it on. So we start at number 1. Roll through. Then do number 2. And when it gets too long like this, then I'll cut it in half so it's easier to handle. And I'll do it again, and we want to keep going until it's the level 5 thinness. Okay, so we have them all rolled out, and then I'm going to take my pizza cutter, and then I'm cutting it into strips. So I would say that's about 1 inch. I don't measure them, I just kind of eyeball it, but you want it about that wide. You can measure it if you'd like to. 1 inch should be good, but I like to just do it quickly. All right, and then so once I've cut them all out, I'll cut them in half, just so they're a little bit easier and more manageable. And then I'll pick off all the extra pieces that aren't gonna be used on the cake, all the scraps. And I'll get those wrapped up and put back. Okay, so now they're all cut out and ready to go. And then I'm just gonna cover them in saran wrap because it does dry out so fast. And if they get too dry, you won't be able to use them. So I just covered these top 2 rows. I work pretty quickly, so I don't need to cover them all, but use your own judgment on that. You could also make less at a time if you're first starting out, just so you can get comfortable with it before you really start going. And then I'm gonna take my cake. So how I do this is I start with the big rosettes and I do those around the cake pretty evenly. I don't measure it, it can just be eyeballed. I like it when there's a little bit of inconsistency with the design like this. I think it looks more whimsical that way. So I'll start with like the big clusters around and then I'll do the fill. So I'll show you how I do the cluster first. So I start and just pick the middle of the cake and put some water. And then you'll take your first strip of fondant. And I kind of like put it like this in my fingers and just stick that right into the middle of the cake. And then I take the rest and I kind of use my fingers and I'm just pressing the fondant into the cake. And you're just wrapping it around and then you're kind of pinching the base, making sure that it's attached to your fondant, because you don't want to keep going and then all of a sudden your whole rose falls off because it's not attached to the cake. So you really want to make sure it's secure. That's where these nails come in really handy. I can get in there and push it in if I need to. But another thing you can do if you don't have nails like this is you can use the back end of your paintbrush and kind of get in there and push it in and make sure that everything's good and it's securely attached. That's also a good way to kind of play with the layers if you want to. And or you can use a Dresden tool or something like that. So you start off with that, and then you take your paintbrush, add some more water around your rosette, take your next strip, and you're just kind of going around. So you just kind of press it in on the sides, pressing it in, and then there you go. And just make sure it's securely attached. You're gonna play around with it, and there you go. So you keep just building around and around and around until you get the big rosette. Okay, so here you can see that they're all kind of dripping in together. So that's when I take a toothpick and I'll just kind of hold it up with a toothpick while it dries. You don't need very much, I just like a little bit of help with that. Okay, so that's our first rosette. I can make it a little bit bigger after, but I kind of start a bit smaller, and then I'm gonna keep going around the cake, so I'll do one here, here, and here, and then I will start filling it in. So just same thing over again here, and you just want to keep building around your rosettes. And just do the same thing you did last time. All right, so I have done all of the core roses for here now. So we started off, I think, with this guy over here. And then I ended up adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 altogether, not 4. So you can see here how these ones are kind of like really close together. These are the last 2 that I did. So I kind of had to have them touching a little bit, which is totally fine. It doesn't have to be even. I don't like when some cakes look like too uniform or too perfect. I kind of like when everything's a little bit different. And yeah, so some rosettes look a little bit different than others, but they're all, I think it's all really beautiful. Okay, so the next step would be to start filling in the spaces in between the rosettes. So I'm gonna roll out some more fondant and we'll get started on that. All right, so I've rolled out our pieces of fondant here, same way as last time. So how I usually start this off is I will start with one of the rosettes here, and I usually just go and add a couple more layers on the top part to build it up a little bit, because once it's dry, it kind of holds its shape better, and then you can, it's not dry yet, it's just a little bit more stiff. Okay, and then I'll kind of go in between the holes here and get that all nice and wet in here. I'll take one of my strips and I'll start in the middle, And then I kind of just let it fall. And there's no rhyme or reason again because you want it to look kind of like natural. So I kind of just let it kind of do what it wants to as I'm attaching it. A little bit more water. Take another strip and do the same thing. So I'm trying to aim to fill in this top part here, so we'll just kind of go like that. Okay. Some more water here. So I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to try to fill this up. So I'm going to go right to the top. And I want this to go down a little bit more, so I'll put more water on here and kind of attach it to that part. Okay, so here's where I definitely need toothpicks. So I'm just gonna take from here because that's already pretty dry. And then if you want to hold it up, you just use the toothpick there. And then I'm gonna add more in here. So like I said, this part, there's no pattern or rhyme or reason that I use. I just kind of go where it takes me. I just start filling in the spots because you want to fill in all this this area of the fondant that's still bare, but you don't want it to look too forced or too even, or it's just gonna look a little strange. So I kind of just let it go where it wants to go. And then you just keep doing that all the way around the cake and fill in all of the gaps. So when there's a little gap here that I have to fill in, you might not have to use the whole strip, which is totally fine. You just kind of rip it off and tuck it in there. So I want to kind of make that stick up a little bit more, so I'm just going to use the toothpick and lift it up. There you go. And for the bottom part's a little easier because you're kind of just like resting it on the base of your cake board. You don't want too much water to get on the bottom or it's going to melt the fondant that's sitting on the bottom there, so just be aware of that. And then here I kind of just place it on the bottom, let it kind of fall, and I'm just kind of like pushing it in. Again with my nail, but you could use any tool that you have on hand if your fingers feel like they're a little bit too big for that. So mine is kind of going over the cake board, which is fine for me, but if you want to make it a little bit easier, you can have a bigger cake board. So usually if we're doing a 6-inch cake, I use an 8-inch cake board. If we're doing an 8-inch cake, I do a 10-inch cake board. But if I'm doing an actual design like this, it adds a bit of width, then I'll go a little bit bigger. And then you're just filling it in there. So this does take some practice, but don't judge it when it's halfway through like this because it looks so good once it's all together. If you look at it, maybe right now it looks a little weird, but once it's all filled in, it's gonna look really pretty. So don't judge it until it's finished. And variations are good. So just because it's not kind of going the way you maybe thought it was going to, just keep going with it and see what you come up with because it's probably gonna be beautiful. Okay, so this is the last piece. So like I said, you really want to make sure each piece is attached. Oh, just kidding, one more. So you want to make sure each piece is pushed down at the base of it, or else a whole chunk is going to fall out of your cake. You really don't want that, especially when it's all beautiful and done. Okay, this should be the last. Oh no, just kidding. There's always more than you think. Okay, so I'll just need a little guy to finish this part up. Okay, so I'm just gonna play around with it. So I like all the top pieces to not kind of like fall over. So even when it's drying, you kind of manipulate it a little bit and push it out. I just think personally it looks better when it's kind of standing up straight as opposed to falling in, so then it's even, it's aligned evenly with the rest of the cake. Okay, so I can take these guys out. All right, so this is my fondant rose technique. So I think it's really beautiful. I think it really adds a lot of texture and dimension to your cakes. And I think that it's a great base. So you should do it on the bottom tier if I'm doing a 3-tier, 4-tier wedding cake. I think it's really beautiful. It adds like a really nice, I don't know, I guess like a romantic vibe, I guess. It's very popular. I do it all the time and I never get sick of it. I think it's beautiful. It can work with so many different designs. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them as fast as I can. And please share your photos with me. I'd love to see what you make when using my tutorials. Just send me a DM or tag us on Instagram. I would love to see what you create. Have fun. See you next time.